this episode of Trial Story, the wife of a minister is found near death.
Barely breathing, fed through a tube.
The prime suspect, her husband, Reverend Walker Railey.
He loses it, and he choked Peggy Railey.
Walker, did you strangle Peggy?
No, I didn't.
A man wrongly accused. In this episode of Trial Story, from opening statements to the verdict, preacher on trial, a case of attempted murder.
Accept our thanks, O God, for these who have come officially to become a part of our family.
The First United Church in Dallas, Texas. It's known as the training ground for some of the most powerful ministers in the country.
Now may the peace of God go with us.
Walker Railey was one of them. At the age of 39, he was a rising star in the Methodist Church.
He was probably the foremost preacher in the United States.
We love him. He's part of our family.
He's what I guess the psychiatrists call a sociopath, as far as I'm concerned. He's totally evil.
Yes, Walker Railey has his detractors. Many in the state of Texas now believe he has fallen from grace.
Let us pray.
The story begins in Dallas, 1987. One spring night, Walker Railey's wife, Peggy Railey, became the victim of a violent, mysterious attack, the kind of crime that can unnerve a suburban neighborhood. Peggy Railey was strangled by an unknown person and left for dead in her garage. She was brought here to Dallas's Presbyterian Hospital, unconscious and fighting for her life. The Dallas community was rattled. The police had found no attack weapon, no conclusive fingerprints, no motive. But the police did have at least one lead, these letters. Letters calling Walker Railey a nigger lover and telling him to get out of town. The minister told the FBI he'd been receiving them for the last few weeks.
And as we stand and sing together, there may be...
Railey was praised as a vocal civil rights leader, using his pulpit to speak out against racism and bigotry. One theory, Peggy Railey was attacked because of Walker Railey's views. But 9 days after the attack, Dallas awoke to surprising news. Railey found unconscious, suicide attempt suspected. On the day police were to question Walker Railey about holes in his alibi for the night of the attack, he took an overdose of pills and left this note. There is a demon inside my soul. At times that demon has lured me to do things I do not want to do. Forgive me for the pain I inflict on so many. That note reinforced Walker Railey as the state's prime suspect.
I really thought there was no one else but Railey that could have done the act.
Prosecutor Cecil Emerson believes that suicide note was a thinly disguised confession, a confession that Walker Railey was responsible for his wife's attack.
The theory of the case was that the preacher, Railey, decided sometime prior to March that he wanted to get rid of his wife.
They have some evidence to connect him circumstantially with the letters and with the threats, but nothing that I've seen thus far to connect him with the actual assault on his wife.
Prominent Dallas defense attorney Doug Mulder, himself a former prosecutor, says the state's got the wrong man. He, along with attorneys Roy Barrera Sr. and his son Roy Barrera Jr., are defending Walker Railey.
This is a trial of a man who's innocent and that he had absolutely nothing to do with the injuries sustained by his wife.
In this case, there's always been the one big issue is reasonable doubt.
Is Walker Railey guilty of choking his wife to near death, or is the state off on a witch hunt, prosecuting a prominent former minister? It's a case where there's little physical evidence, no murder weapon, no fingerprints, but it's also a case of suspicious circumstances. In the next hour, you'll find out if the state can prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt.
The first inkling that we had any reason to develop a theory of the case as related to the attack on his wife began in March 1987 when Railey started sending those phony, quote, threatening letters to himself.
The prosecutor calls the letters phony because it contends Walker Railey wrote those letters himself.
He could use this same scheme to throw off an investigation, to make it appear, so to speak, that some racist-type individuals were trying to kill him and his family and they finally got one of them, that is his wife.
The state says there's a motive. It involves another woman.
Several characteristics of it.
Her name is Lucy Papillon. She's a psychologist who also hosted at one time a self-help talk show.
Papillon, could we talk to you a second, please?
She was also Walker Railey's mistress. The state claims Walker Railey plotted to kill his wife so he could marry Papillon, but still retain his powerful position in the church. And the state claims Walker Railey methodically planned a false alibi. The alibi involves a visit to this library at the SMU campus to do research. But the state says he lied about the timing of that visit and tried to cover up his movements by leaving suspicious phone messages on his home answering machine that misstated the time.
I don't have a watch. It's somewhere between 10:30, 10:45, somewhere along in there.
It has taken the state of Texas nearly 6 years to indict Walker Railey, but prosecutor Emerson says the evidence is now on his side. He also points to Railey's strange behavior toward his family. Railey seldom visits his wife Peggy, who is now in what doctors call a persistent vegetative state, and he's given up custody of his children.
If they were that proud of their case today, where was that pride 6 years ago? Why didn't they present it at that time?
But the defense says there simply is no evidence linking Walker Railey to the crime scene, and that after 6 long years after the attack, the state is no closer to proving its case. The defense insists that the only thing Walker Railey is guilty of is trying to cover up an affair.
We have to remember the charge is attempted murder, and he's on trial for that. He has pled not guilty, and we expect that to be the result on this case.
How are you holding up? I'm doing all right.
For the past 6 years, while the state has tried to build a case, Walker Railey has walked free. He left Dallas soon after the attack and moved to California. But now the state of Texas has brought him back to face charges of attempted murder of his wife.
Showtime!
All right.
Mr. Emerson, are we ready with the witness?
Yes.
In a surprising move, the state elects not to give an opening statement. Instead, prosecutors Cecil Emerson and Howard Wilson began the state's case with a bang. Peggy Railey's mother, Billie Jo Nicolai, is called as the first witness to take the stand. She and her husband travel to a nursing home every day to care for their daughter.
Ms. Nicolai, do you know a man by the name of Walker L. Railey?
Yes, I do.
Is this Mr. Railey sitting over here?
Yes, that's
Gentleman
Walker.
stood up here. That's him?
That's Walker.
Tell us when you first met him, if you can recall.
I can tell you that it was at least 17 years ago. Peggy had come to Texas to go to SMU for her master's.
Did Peggy tell you anything about any disturbing letters that she had either received, the family received, or that affected her family in any way?
Yes.
Did she say anything about if she had any knowledge as to where the letters came from?
She had been told, but now this is was hearsay to me, but she had been told that they had discovered that letters, some of the letters had been typed on a typewriter in the church.
In what church?
In First Methodist Church in Dallas, where Walker was preaching.
Billie Jo Nicolai has introduced some important facts, but the prosecution leaves them unexplained. What are these letters? Who wrote them? How did Peggy Railey know where they were typed? These are just some of the many pieces of evidence left for the jurors to ponder. And for the news media to question. Who attacked Peggy Railey may be the biggest mystery to hit Dallas since the Kennedy assassination. The case has attracted so much attention that before the trial even began, it was moved from Dallas to San Antonio, nearly 300 miles away.
It was changed here because of the excessive media publicity in Dallas for five and a half, 6 years. So I think the judge decided San Antonio was a good place for the defendant and the state to get a very fair trial, and we're looking forward to it.
You can get a fair trial?
Ask me in a week.
All right.
Prosecutors Cecil Emerson and Howard Wilson are trying to piece together a complicated puzzle of facts to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Walker Railey tried to choke his wife to death. Peggy Railey's mother, Billie Jo Nicolai, has testified on behalf of the state. Now defense attorney Roy Barrera Sr. gets his turn to cross-examine the witness.
You say that you have known Walker Railey about 17 years.
I would think maybe more than that, but about.
All right. During the time that you and he have known each other, have you had a pleasant or unpleasant relationship with him?
We've had a pleasant relationship.
A pleasant relationship with him. Have you and your... Well,
in my mind, Walker may have something else.
Well, but you would know otherwise if your relationship with him was unpleasant.
Right.
All right. You said that when she came up, she expressed to you some concerns about some letters that had been received.
Yes, we talked about it.
Did she give you the content of these letters in any manner, shape, or form? What did she tell you if she did?
Only when another letter, we got another letter today, same way, but no, I do not. We didn't ask her to read them to us, and she didn't.
Did you ever, during the time of their marriage, ever see any signs on Peggy, on her body, of physical abuse or violence?
Not that I recall.
Did she ever have occasion to tell you about any physical abuse or violence perpetrated upon her by anybody?
There have been many occasions, but I didn't hear any of those. We did not drag everything out to talk about.
You may have misunderstood my question. Did she ever tell you about any physical abuse or violence perpetrated upon her by anyone?
No, she didn't.
Isn't it a fact that he would always take positions that were against racism, and he was outspoken about that? You knew that, didn't you, ma'am?
Pardon?
You knew that, didn't you?
Yes.
The defense has taken this opportunity to portray the defendant as a man of principle. But on redirect examination, prosecutor Cecil Emerson reminds the jury of the real victim.
She is in what the doctors call a persistent vegetative state. She's fed through a tube in her stomach. She her hands and her feet are in this condition. I don't know what it would be called. She's not able to communicate with us in any way.
After nearly 2 hours on the stand, it's unclear which side has benefited from Billie Jo Nicolai's testimony. Still unexplained to the jury is the relevance of those letters, whether or not they were part of Walker Railey's plot to kill his wife.
Ms. Nicolai, you can stand down.
What the jury won't learn is that Billie Jo Nicolai won $18 million in a civil suit over her daughter's injuries against Walker Railey, a judgment which remains unpaid. Judge Pat McDowell has ruled in this case that the civil award isn't relevant to these criminal charges. Walker Railey reaches out to Billie Jo Nicolai as she leaves the courtroom. Her seemingly friendly response is a moment jurors told us later they remembered clearly. Next, the prosecution introduces the threatening letters Walker Railey claims he received.
It's a typed letter beginning, Walker Railey, Dallas don't want any nigger lovers like you. Why don't you keep your nose out of everybody's business and stick it in the Bible where it belongs? Walker Railey, just because people come down on Sunday don't mean you're something. Dallas don't need any goddamn communist like you. The only good communist is a dead communist. Better start looking around the corner, you son of a bitch. I'm on your tail. How do you like that?
Have a sit in the witness stand, please, Mr. McNear.
The state continues to build its case by calling to the stand Detective Stan McNear. He testifies about Railey's original alibi.
When the conversation started, he pretty much told me that he was a pastor of the First United Methodist Church there in Dallas, that he had a congregation of approximately 6,000, and that he had been receiving 6 threatening letters. He told me that he had received 4 of them through the mail, I believe, at his office. He received 1 at home, and the most recent one was placed on the door of his office on Easter Sunday. He told me that he went home around 6:30, stayed approximately 30 minutes. He left, drove to the SMU libraries, that he was doing footnotes for a book that he was going to be the author of, that he made a couple phone calls. He He told me that he called his wife back on the direct line at approximately 8:45 and talked to her and told her that he was okay. He said he again called her around 10:30 on the recorder just to let her know that he was still okay. And he told me that he called again sometime around 12:30 again to the recorder to let her know that he was on the way home and that he had finished his work at the library. He told me that when he arrived home, he drove into the rear driveway, and when his lights shined on the door, he noticed that the garage door was up approximately 18 to 24 inches, that he hit his remote button, and the door, I believe, went completely down and then raised completely. And he said that he drove in, he parked his car beside his wife's car. He noticed that the interior lights in the garage never came on. He got out of his car, he walked around to the front, he saw his wife's body lying in front of her car.
On cross-examination, defense attorney Doug Mulder questions the witness about why the police failed to check out all the possible leads.
Did you attempt to find people in the neighborhood who had seen a black male running at a high rate of speed on the evening of April the 21st of 1987?
No one ever mentioned, other than this lady here, about seeing a black male in the area, and only partial true what you said about leaving the rear of the Railey residence. She saw him running from some bushes on her street.
Did you go out into the neighborhood to see if anyone else had seen that person?
During our interviews of the door knocks, no one mentioned ever seeing a black male, and this lady wasn't sure that it was a black male.
Y'all got the partial license number of a white van, didn't you?
I don't know if we got a license number or not. I know that a white van was seen on White Rock Trail, but I don't recall if there was a license number taken or not. If it's in my notes, then I did.
I take it that since you're unfamiliar with it, nothing further was done about that white van?
To my knowledge, not.
Just didn't seem important?
I don't even know if they had a license number for it or not, and there's more than one white van, I think, probably in Dallas.
The defense hopes the jury will question why the police focused on Walker Railey as their suspect and ignored other possible clues.
Time and distance always works to the benefit of a defendant. Memories fade, evidence gets lost.
Hi, babe. I'm calling you from my mobile phone.
One piece of evidence that hasn't disappeared is a recording of a phone message Walker Railey left for his wife on the night she was attacked. The state calls police officer James Gallagher to the stand.
Peg, it's about, I don't know, I don't have to watch. It's somewhere between 10:30, 10:45, somewhere along in there. I'll be in about 1. If you want to, go ahead and lock the garage door, and I'll park out front.
So far, the state has juggled a number of pieces of evidence before the jury, including threatening letters and phone calls. But with no opening statement as a guide, will the jury be able to follow the state's case?
We were very surprised by the lack of an opening statement by the state of Texas, especially in a circumstantial evidence case. Generally, the prosecution wants to give the jury a blueprint, at least of what he expects to present to them, so that they can understand the evidence as it unfolds.
I never have really been a fan of opening statements because I feel like it's the jury's prerogative to listen to the evidence, see the evidence that's admissible, and make the determination as to the guilt or innocence of a defendant.
One thing is clear, the public has had no problem following the trial of Walker Railey.
This has been described as the case of the century.
Every day, crowds of people line up to watch a real-life drama unfold before their eyes. A minister, respected in the community, on trial for trying to kill his wife. There's one witness in particular who the crowd is waiting to see.
Naturally, I'm interested in Lucy Papillon's testimony.
Why is that?
Well, aren't we all?
Lucy Papillon is Walker Railey's former lover. Papillon has been subpoenaed by the state to testify. Prosecutors say she has not been cooperative.
How do you feel Dr. Papillon is going to help your case?
Well, you know, it's just another witness that we're a bus stop along the way in the Railey travels.
But in fact, the state is hoping Papillon will be living proof that Walker Railey wanted to kill his wife. The defense has other plans. to show Walker Railey's actions were suspicious, not because he was a strangler, but because he was an adulterer.
Lucy Papillon is going to develop for the state and for this entire state of Texas exactly probably what happened on this night in question, and I think that her testimony is going to be very revealing and is going to show the innocence of Walker Railey.
Lucy Papillon is a twice-divorced psychologist who is the daughter of a Methodist bishop.
In June of 1986, did you and the defendant enter into a different kind of relationship?
Yes.
Okay. And did this new relationship involve sex?
Yes.
In fact, you and Mr. Railey started having an affair, is that correct?
Yes.
And from June of 1986 through April of 1987, did you and Mr. Railey have sexual intercourse on a fairly regular basis?
I would say fairly regular basis.
Okay. And did you have several trips out of town where you would either, I think you usually met Dr. Railey out of town at these trips, is that wrong?
Yes.
And then I think you went to London, England, is that correct?
Yes.
And Wichita, Kansas?
Yes.
San Francisco, California, January of 1987?
I believe so.
Atlanta, Georgia?
Yes, sir.
Austin, Texas?
Yes.
And Conway, Arkansas?
Yes.
And normally, you might often have your same room at that time, is that correct?
No, sir.
Okay, you stay with him?
I would have, I thought she meant we would often have the same, we would have separate rooms.
Oh, did he ever tell you that he was in love with you?
He would just talk about having feelings, strong feelings, that he cared.
You don't recall him ever actually telling you that he was in love with you?
I don't recall that.
And did you and he ever discuss getting married to one another?
We never discussed it specifically at all. There was a discussion or two, very hypothetical, as one might, but not ever any other than that.
Okay. Could you just tell the jury what you mean by hypothetical discussion about y'all getting married?
Just has any couple might, just fantasizing, you know, if such and such and this and that, and many things were different, but just in a very, just I think once, and it was in just a very nondescript fashion at all.
Prosecutor Howard Wilson now questions Papillon about events on the night Peggy Railey was attacked.
As best I can remember, he called my office at some point.
Okay, do you recall what the conversation was or anything about that?
I think he just said, could I see you?
Okay.
Could I come over?
Okay, and what did you tell him if you recall?
I said that would be fine.
And did he come over?
He did.
Okay. And about how long, about what time did he get there, if you recall?
I don't really recall. There would be no reason to remember it. I guess it was probably around 7:30, something like that, because that's when I would usually get home.
How long did he stay?
Also, again, I wouldn't have any reason to keep note of that. It seemed like it was about 45 minutes.
During this 45 minutes, what did y'all do?
Well, we just talked about the day, talked about what he was doing in terms of 2 books that he was writing.
Did he tell you he was over at SMU doing research?
Yes.
Had been doing this? Did you hear from Dr. Railey again that night?
I heard from Dr. Railey around 11 o'clock.
Okay, and was that a telephone call?
That was a phone call.
Okay. And can you tell the jury what that conversation consisted of?
At that time, he asked if he could come over. He talked about some things he'd gotten done at the library.
The conversation was interrupted. Did he call you back again after that?
He did. He called me back in about 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Doctor. You said that on the first conversation he wanted to come, said he wanted to come over. What did you tell him?
Oh, I told him that I was really tired and it was late, so I said no.
Okay.
Did Railey try to kill his wife so he could be with Lucy Papillon? Prosecutor Howard Wilson fumbles his chance to underscore that theory. He does not press the witness for details about the affair or about what happened that night. On cross-examination, defense attorney Doug Mulder tries to use the state's star witness to advance his own case.
Do you feel, Dr. Papillon, that Walker Railey, as you know him, is capable of violence toward his wife?
Absolutely not. I know that he's incapable.
Has he ever had occasion to be violent with you or anyone, to your knowledge?
None. Never.
When he spoke of his wife, did he speak of his wife with respect?
Very much.
Did you think he loved his wife and his children?
Cared a lot for both of them, a lot of respect for her.
I take it from what you told Mr. Wilson that you're no longer involved in a relationship with Walker Railey at this time?
Yeah, right.
Did he ever make the statement to you that if y'all's relationship ever became public and the church members, congregation found out about it, that he would kill himself?
He said that. I didn't quite interpret it literally, but he did say those words.
I don't think she damaged Walker, but I don't think she was in a position to damage him.
We got all we could get out of her at that particular time. I wish that she would have told more. I wish she would have talked to us about all the details of that telephone conversation that she had with Walker Railey on the 21st.
The state next turns its attention to Walker Railey's whereabouts during the hours when Peggy Railey was attacked, between 9:30 and 11:30 at night. The defendant told police he was here at the SMU library all evening. A number of state witnesses say they saw Walker Railey, but at different times.
It was about 9:15. It was a little before 9 o'clock.
I think it was right after 12, the reason being...
But prosecutors maintain that while witnesses may have seen Walker Railey at the library, he had enough time to return to his home between the hours of 9:30 and 11:30, the time of the attack.
The first time I saw him was 10:45.
But testimony about the time sequence seems confusing, and there are gaps.
Something that has influenced my thinking that it was early in the evening was because a friend of mine said she saw Walker leaving and she was thinking she was going to be late to watch Wheel of Fortune. That influenced my thinking that it was early in the evening.
The state then calls a witness it hopes will make Walker Railey's actions that night seem suspicious.
Let me ask you to raise your hand if you would.
Dr. Stephen Mbutu was working at the library the night Peggy Railey was attacked. Railey says he handed Mbutu his business card with a message, 10:30 p.m. Tuesday. Need help on biography of Ann Sullivan? We'll call Wednesday.
He told me that he was going to give me his business card because he'd been looking for a book which he couldn't find. And so he wanted me to give that card to the reference librarian so they can look for the book for him. And he said he would call the following day around midday to find if they had found the book.
Okay, now, you recall about what time this was?
My recollection was that it was around midnight. And this is not my recollection today, it was my recollection within about 36 hours of that happening.
The prosecution's point that Walker Railey tried to plant false evidence to support his alibi. The state claims that isn't the only time Railey lied that night. Remember the phone call Railey made to his wife from his car phone, played earlier in the trial.
I'm calling you from my mobile phone. It's about, I don't have to watch. It's somewhere between 10:30 and 10:45, somewhere along in there.
Now Prosecutor Howard Wilson calls an expert on cellular phone.
Can you tell me the mobile phone number that originated the call?
Yes, sir, I can.
And what is that mobile phone number? Let's start with number 7.
That mobile phone number is 957-8024.
Okay. Not here. And can you tell me the number that was called?
Yes, sir, I can.
And what was called?
3410845.
And can you tell me, right? Can you tell me the time that this call was placed?
Yes, sir, I can.
And what time was it placed?
Observation number 7, for example, was placed on the 22nd of April. This is 1987, the 22nd of April of 1987 in the early morning hours, 4 minutes after midnight, 12:04 a.m.
Was Walker Railey lying about the time when he made that phone call? If so, is that proof that Railey was indeed plotting his alibi? Another phone call was also played for the jury, one that Walker Railey made 20 minutes after the first.
I just wanted you to know that I'm on the way home. It's 12:30. I'll be home at 12:45. Love you, dear. Bye-bye.
According to phone records, Railey correctly stated the time for the second call. Does that make his first call more suspicious? So far, the prosecution has relied on circumstantial evidence. But now, as it starts to wrap up its case, the prosecution introduces some physical evidence.
The typewriter that was submitted to me for this examination, it was an
The state returns to the threatening letters Walker Railey says he received. The state introduces a typewriter from Walker Railey's church.
Based on your examination of the typewriter and the element and the ribbon and State's Exhibit number 32, the typewriter, what is the likelihood this typewriter and element was used to prepare the questioned threatening letters and or the envelopes that you've examined previously?
It's my opinion that there's a high degree of likelihood that the typewriting the typewriter Exhibit 32 I used to prepare State's Exhibit number 78 was also used in preparation of the question typewriting appearing on the letters and the envelopes.
The prosecution says it was Walker Railey who typed those letters on the church typewriter, and the prosecution says it has proof.
DNA evidence is going to be very strong, though.
The state calls experts on DNA testing, a sort of high-tech genetic fingerprinting based on a person's blood and saliva, to try and match Railey's saliva with that of a stamp found on one of the threatening letters.
Based on my opinion, those samples, K24, the known blood sample from Walker Railey, and the DNA was found in the saliva from the envelope, Q1, match each other.
Basically, none of the DNA technologies at this point in time offer absolute identity. But what they do is give you some degree of discrimination between individuals. We know that they are different. For example, I tried to demonstrate here what those differences might look like, and we know that those differences occur in populations throughout the world. All we're attempting to do is to give you some idea of how common or rare they are in populations throughout the world.
The state hopes this will prove that Walker Railey signed, sealed, and delivered those threatening letters to himself. But on cross-examination, defense attorney Roy Barrera, Jr. questions the witness about the accuracy of DNA testing.
Based upon those percentages and based upon these numbers, you cannot exclude these folks from having deposited the 2,2 DNA that you lifted from Q1.
And all I'm saying to you is that these numbers represent certain portions of the population that we would expect to have that type. Okay. All I'm saying is that blood type represents a certain portion of the population. And that's all I can tell you about that. I can tell you no more about that. I can't exclude anybody else as a contributor until I actually tested them.
We don't know if the 2,2 on Q1 was a white man, black man, Hispanic man, white woman, black woman, Hispanic woman, nor their age, do we?
I don't know. That's correct. Yes, sir. I don't know.
The defense may have cast reasonable doubt on the DNA results.
Please, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen, the jury, the state rests its case. Chief, this time.
Thank you, Mr. Emerson.
After 11 days of testimony and over 40 witnesses, the state rests its case.
We really thought, quite frankly, that taking all of those unconnected parts and putting them in as a whole, that our theory was that the jury would see it again as a complete picture, a broad-based picture that was totally related. And
do these unconnected parts add up to a verdict of guilty? One witness the jury will never hear from, Ryan Railey, Walker Railey's son. He once told a family friend that when he was a 5-year-old, he witnessed the attack, and he identified his father as the attacker. But now 11-year-old Ryan Railey has wavered, and the state isn't willing to take the chance of calling him to the stand.
Dr. Railey, how do you feel after 2 weeks of this, sir?
I feel like I'm going to let my lawyer keep talking.
It's day 12 of the trial, and it's time for the defense to make its case. For Walker Railey, the past 6 years haven't been easy. He's been hounded by the press, pursued by the state, and is the target of a suspicious public. Through it all, he's maintained he's innocent.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think the reasonable doubt is already all over this case, and but we expect our case to last about 2 days.
Ready to swear or affirm in this case the testimony you give.
The former minister now gets his chance to speak out, to tell the jury exactly where he was the night his wife was attacked.
I left the house, I guess about 25 of 7. I told Peggy that I would be home around midnight, and I started driving toward the SMU campus to Bridwell Library on the southern part of the campus in the Seminary Quadrangle.
You arrived there at Bridwell and stayed approximately a half hour. All right, and
Yes,
when you came out, where were you going?
I walked to my car and was going to the home of Lucy Papillon.
How long did you stay at Lucy Papillon's?
Not more than 30 minutes.
So you returned to Bridwell at or about 8 p.m., is that?
A little after 8.
A little after 8?
A little after 8. I guess 8:45, somewhere along in there, 20 of 9. I really had gotten to one of those places where you're not productive. I was tired, hadn't eaten since lunch, kept staring at the page and not getting anything accomplished. So I decided I might slip out and find something cold to drink or crackers or something to put a little something in my stomach. I went down University just beyond Central Expressway to a Texaco food mart, which I often stopped at to fill up with gas. I originally had planned simply to get something cold to drink and maybe some nabs or something like that, but when I pulled into the Texaco station, I realized I was low on gas. So I filled up with gas, paid by a credit card, and picked up a bottle of the Bartles and James wine cooler and some peanut butter and crackers. The charge slip says it was 8:53 p.m. Probably got back to Bridwell 7 or 8 after 9 at the latest, I would think.
A few minutes after 9?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And did you stay there at Bridwell?
I stayed there until Bridwell prepared to close.
When you left Bridwell shortly before it closed, where did you go?
I drove up very close to where I had parked when I went to Lucy Papillon's and went to Fondren Library.
Defense attorney Doug Mulder now asks his client to explain what the state claims are inconsistencies in Railey's story. In particular, the business card he gave Dr. Mbutu.
Did you write a note to the reference librarian?
Yes, I did. Monday afternoon at SMU, the reference librarian had been very helpful in helping me track down or get close to tracking down a footnote regarding a syndicated journalist named Ellen Goodman. So her desk was probably as far as the end of the courtroom from where I was in the reference room. And I didn't see her up there, but I wasn't sure that she was not working the night shift. So I pulled out one of my business cards and put the date and the time, which was 10:30, and I could see it clearly from the clock that was on the wall.
What's the next thing you did prior to departing?
Well, I had to walk right by the reference librarian's desk to take a right turn to go out of the reference room. And when I did, I noticed the card, which I had left on her desk, asking for help with the Ann Sullivan story, still on her desk in the same place I'd left it. And I was concerned that the people who would come in to clean up might accidentally, in straightening up the top of the desk, lose it or get it to a place where she wouldn't see it. So I simply picked up the card and took it over to the reference desk. There were some students being taken care of by Dr. Mbutu, and I waited in line. And when he finished with them, I introduced myself and told him that I was working on some research and would appreciate his giving this card to the reference librarian.
From the time you entered Fondren Library at approximately 10 p.m. until you left shortly before 12 midnight, did you ever have occasion to leave the library for any purpose whatsoever?
No, I didn't.
What was your purpose in making that phone call shortly after midnight, calling your wife on the public phone when you knew that the ringer was off at the house?
I was lying to my wife and created an alibi to go see Lucy Papillon.
Well, had this relationship with Lucy Papillon, had this developed into a love affair? I mean, were you in love with a woman? Were you planning to leave your wife?
No, I wasn't planning to leave Peggy. I think it was an infatuation.
On your part or on Lucy Papillon's part?
On my part.
Doug Mulder turns to the moment when Walker Railey found his wife on the garage floor.
I saw half of Peggy's body in front of her car sticking out from the front of the Chrysler.
What did you do when you saw that?
I jumped out of the car and I ran to her. And her face was red. It was almost purple. It was swollen. She was gurgling, and there was something coming out of the left side of her mouth. And I put my hands on her shoulders and screamed at her, trying to get her to respond. And she didn't do anything. Her eyes were just glazed over. So I ran to the car and blew the horn 3 or 4 times and ran out in the alley. The door was still open. So I ran into the kitchen and called 911 and told them it looked like somebody had beaten up my wife, and I told them it hurt Peggy to come.
The defense questions Railey about what the state says is his confession note, the note he left after attempting to commit suicide.
My demon has finally gotten the upper hand. All of my life, people have seen me as strong. The truth is just the opposite. I am the weakest of the weak. People have seen me as good. The truth is just the opposite. I am the baddest of the bad. People have seen me as virtuous. The truth is just the opposite. I am the lowest of the low. When I wrote these words, there was one thing that I was more aware of than anything else. And that is, if I'd been at home that night, instead it was somebody else, this may not have happened. And if it had happened, it may have happened to me and not to Peggy. And that is a shame and a guilt that won't go away. And that's what I meant by being so low that I just couldn't go any deeper.
Walker, did you strangle Peggy?
No, I didn't.
Do you know who did?
No, I don't.
Walker Railey has testified in no uncertain terms that he did not attack his wife.
I think he's crying for himself, or just, he was just an actor.
Prosecutor Cecil Emerson now gets his turn to cross-examine the defendant.
Do you have anything else you want to get off your chest here today?
I said what I think I needed to say earlier, sir.
Okay. You sure you have nothing else you want to say about that?
About what?
About what happened to your wife.
About my not doing anything to my wife?
No. About you doing something to your wife.
I did not strangle Peggy. I don't know who strangled Peggy. I had nothing to do with the events surrounding the strangling of Peggy.
Did you lose your temper when she found out about you writing those threatening letters?
I did not lose my temper. I did not write the threatening letters.
Did you lose your temper when she found out, if she did, about your love affair with Lucy?
I have no knowledge that Peggy ever learned about that love affair, but I did not lose my temper about that.
You have not said one word, have you, Dr. Railey, about your poor, injured, damaged, and almost dead wife, have you? Not one time today have you said anything about her, have you?
That's not the way I remember it, sir.
It's all Walker Railey, isn't it? Poor me, right?
No, sir, I was just simply admitting the error of my ways in betraying my marriage. and my wife.
Kind of looks like from this letter that you were confessing to doing something to Peggy, to me. Is that the way you interpret it?
At the bottom of the first page, when I refer to myself as the lowest of the low, I was confessing an overwhelming sense of shame that I was not home on the occasion that somebody hurt my wife. In that regard, I was confessing the guilt and the sense of betrayal that I felt of not being there when my family needed me.
Is Walker Railey a man capable of choking his wife? The jury has to grapple not only with that larger question, but with hundreds of details about what happened on the night of her attack. The question remains, do these details lead to a verdict of guilty beyond a reasonable doubt?
We're going to win today.
The prosecution is optimistic.
We're going to win this case when the jury comes back.
Mr. Mulder, the prosecutors say they're winning. What do you say?
I say good morning.
It's almost Judgment Day. Soon it will be up to the jury to decide if Walker Railey is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of attempting to murder his wife.
Have argument, counsel, please.
Yes, please, court.
Mr. Wilson.
But first, the attorneys deliver their closing arguments. For the state, Prosecutor Howard Wilson.
I submit, ladies and gentlemen, it's a reasonable deduction from the evidence. Peggy Railey found out what was going on. She found out about the letters, and she may have known about the affair. I've always thought wives know a whole lot more about their husbands than their husbands think they know. And when Walker Railey called her at 9 o'clock from Bridwell, or 8:45, or whenever he made that call that he told you about, she in effect said, you better get your little skinny fanny home because we got some talking to do. I'm mad and I'm going to straighten this out. And they sit down to see if they can work out the problem, and somewhere in that time he loses it. He loses it and he chokes Peggy Railey down.
For the defense, attorney Doug Mulder.
I know that you'll examine this theory that Mr. Wilson tossed out to you and find that there is absolutely not a scintilla of evidence to support it. There's nothing. It's simply conjecture.
The state gets one last chance for a final closing argument.
Peggy Railey will never, never get to hug her two children. Kiss them on the forehead. Kiss them good night. And say, thank you, God, for giving me these two beautiful children. She can't enjoy that anymore. Thank you. I've done all I can do.
It's a favorite prosecution tactic to remind jurors just before they deliberate about the hopeless future of a victim. But there are a few facts the jury will never hear. Since the attack in 1987, Walker Railey has tried to get a divorce from his wife, and he has given up custody of his children. While these facts may raise a question about Walker Railey's character, the court has ruled that they are not relevant to this trial. The jury will instead have to reach its decision by sifting through and weighing the evidence, evidence that is, for the most part, circumstantial. And the jury must be convinced by that evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to convict Walker Railey of attempted murder. If they're not convinced, Walker Railey must be acquitted.
Done all I can do. It's up to somebody else now to carry the freight. And whatever happens, that's the way it'll be.
Yes, he's anxious. Yes, he's concerned. Yes, he's hopeful. And yes, he's going through a lot of emotional turmoil right now into what to do with the balance of his life and how it's going to be affected by what this jury decides.
If convicted, Walker Railey faces a sentence of up to 20 years in prison. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury reaches its verdict.
I'll read the verdict to the jury. In the case of the State of Texas versus Walker L. Railey, we, the jury, find the defendant Walker L. Railey not guilty.
Walker Railey is found not guilty of attempted murder.
I feel great. I also feel very sad because Peggy's still where she is. And I have a lot of thoughts for Billie Jo Nicolai and the family. This is a tough time for them. And it's a sad day for me. This has been like going back 6 years in time. And I don't know what's out ahead. I don't even know what I'm going to do tonight.
One of these days, he's going to have to reconcile the fact that he did do it, and somebody will judge him and will convict him.
While the prosecutor remains convinced of his guilt, the jurors didn't think the prosecution proved the case. Jury foreman Kent Meredith and fellow juror Debra Allen spoke with us after the trial.
It was not ruled out that he did or he didn't do it, but there was not enough evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to convict this man guilty.
I still think he did it, beyond a reasonable doubt. And I just have to live with that. But Walker also has to live with the fact that he did this, and if he did do it, he has to live with that fact for the rest of his life.
I really thought they're going to put all this together for me that I'm not understanding, that maybe there is a possibility that he did that. But after they did that, I said there's no way, according to their statements and their closing arguments, there's no way you can prove this to me right now.
I just gave in to my own feelings of, I guess, inadequacies, of saying surely 11 people can't be wrong and one person is right.
So after almost 2 weeks of emotional testimony and nearly 6 years of pursuit by the prosecutor's office, Walker Railey is free to start his life over. It's a case that illustrates how very carefully our legal system protects the rights of the defendant and presumes innocence, not guilt. For Court TV, I'm Fred Graham.
My prayers all 6 years have been that God continue to keep the world in the way it needs to be.
Legal bill.